Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games, and Tears of the Kingdom, the highly anticipated sequel, was teased way back in 2019, so we've been waiting for almost 4 years now. Now it's finally out, and it has a lot to live up to. So, does it live up to the hype? By the way, this review will be mostly gameplay focused, and will be spoiler free for most of the contents of the story. But a lot of gameplay elements will be spoiled, just so you know, okay guys? But without further ado, let's get right into it. It goes without saying that a huge part of Tears of the Kingdom is exploration. The map is not the same. So many things are different, and it doesn't feel like you're just replaying Breath of the Wild. Somehow, Tears of the Kingdom has retained that sense of wonder and excitement of discovering new things and landmarks. The sky and underground are a great addition. They're vast and different and scales things up from Breath of the Wild. So let's first talk about the underground. While exploring the underground, bulbs show up from directly under a shrine location from the underworld, and interacting with them gradually lights up the underground map. It also recovers the gloom damage that you've taken. It would be cool if they served some other purpose, or, well, had a reward more catering to player progression for reaching them, or some sort of, fun challenge. Furthermore, the rewards for gathering POs, which are scattered across the underground, don't seem as significant as most other things that you can gather within the game. You can exchange the pose for armor at a bargainer statue, but besides that, that's really it. The best rewards progression-wise is what you gain from mining for Sonite. But even that has its own complications, because you either have a frequently breaking pickaxe, sword, or shield, or you have to resort to using a sage power, which has its own problems. Though the Sonite you do mine can help you upgrade your battery cells for Sonite devices. And that's good. Moving on though, above the clouds, into the sky. In the sky, going in blind, initially the islands sometimes seem too hard to get to, or almost unreachable. But now that I know more, you can use Sonite technology to make traversing throughout the sky much easier. Though there is a lot of barren space up in the sky, and it would be cooler to have a higher amount of bigger sky islands that would be more substantial. It moves us on to Koroks. I like Koroks in general, but Korok escorts can be annoying at times, especially if they take too long or stray far from where you originally were going. The escorts create sort of an imbalance between time spent and rewards, depending on the challenge, especially the most difficult escorts that can take ages. You do get 2 Korok seeds, but the escort can take way longer than double the amount of time it would normally take for you to unveil a single Korok. One of the things I really like about exploration is just taking your time and beholding the sights. It's a very nice experience, and it helps you kind of escape from reality. It's just a sort of feeling that this game encapsulates very well, something that Breath of the Wild does too. A lot of Sheikah technology vanished off the face of the planet. Even if the machines aren't evil anymore, why'd they stop existing? Did they and the Sonite have some sort of correlation? Did they interact with each other? Wouldn't this interaction between two ancient technologies have been sort of interesting? I guess that's a question that's left to be unanswered, because the only remnants of Sheikah technology are, for what I know, the redesigned towers and as well as the Pura pad. Wait, where did the old towers go? Speaking of Sheikah technology, a huge part of it was the divine beasts. Giant mechanical beings that served as the main shrines from Breath of the Wild, and they're completely gone. They used to be visible from afar and served as sort of a fun way to mark a place of interest without telling you directly. The divine beasts being absent can definitely be felt. Furthermore, most, if not all, of the locations for story and memory progression in the game are sort of just given to you rather than leaving you to find them on your own. They just mark your map in some way, and I much prefer in Breath of the Wild when memories were pictures of locations you had to locate on your own rather than going to the places just given out to you. What I really liked in Breath of the Wild were the dragons, and they were a huge part for me, especially because I had no idea they were there to begin with when I first played the game. When I first encountered the electric dragon Farash south of the Great Plateau, it was a moment that stuck with me, especially with the majestic, jaw-dropping music that plays when you draw close. You know what? Just take a listen.
The
inclusion of the light dragon and the lore regarding dragons without any details or spoilers is very interesting, and I just love it. You can also shoot the dragon, and shooting them grants either a horn, fang, claw, or scale depending on where you hit them. These are now much more useful since you can also fuse them with your weapon, as well as using them to upgrade armor. Oh yeah, you can now ride dragons! You can stand on top of them, like that's wild. You can just... Also, oh my god, they go underground, like what's going on? What he's going down the hole? Like, bro, what? Are you going into the freaking caves? What? Now, the more like sad and silly part is actually reaching them. Especially if you're in a position where you want to, but you just can't. It kind of makes you miss Ravali's scale from Breath of the Wild a lot. Sometimes I've just put springs down to get height fast, but it's by no means a smooth operation. And sometimes not even the springs can bring me as close as I want to be to the dragon. Since then I've learned of a sky bike made of 2 fans and a control stick. It's pretty consistent and effective at getting you up high without breaking apart. But anyways, I sort of wish that there were more similar but different, like, majestic creatures that leave you in awe, something like the dragons within the game. Especially with the divine beasts gone. Oh yeah, other notes. Slip-resistant potions are there. They don't seem to work too greatly against the rain. Don't know about the slip-resistant armor though, I haven't tried it. It doesn't feel like worth making these potions, especially when they don't work too well. It's just, you slip a lot, but you just slip slightly less if you drink a slip-resistant potion, so it's sort of just a thing. You just don't feel like climbing anyways. It would be a world of difference if the slip-resistant potions just made you not slip. One thing that can be felt when playing the game is not having stasis. It just feels like I'm missing something when I just don't have stasis from Breath of the Wild. I mean, I did get more used to it over time, but still, I just kinda want to have it. Bullet time bounce with the bombs is really missed as well in some regard by the part of the player base who could actually perform them. I'm not one of them! But I suppose those players who bent physics in Breath of the Wild won't be stopped so easily here either. But I've already seen a ton of crazy exploits, and this is just the beginning. Way more cold locations than warm ones, it feels like. These locations are where you need to take precautions so you don't take damage from the extreme temperatures. I just don't see myself needing to do much about warm climate often, especially when the surface of Death Mountain has become room temperature. Oh, and swimming is still a pain. Falling or landing in water feels like a death sentence. At least you do recover a bit of stamina when falling into water now, but oftentimes there's not enough stamina to get anywhere in a reasonable time, especially if you're in the middle of a big lake. So in my opinion, it really should consume stamina slower than climbing otherwise would, just to make the swimming experience smoother. Diving could have been a pretty interesting addition. I guess they could add it to the Tears of the Kingdom sequel, or the sequel to the sequel of Breath of the Wild. But then again, having diving would have a lot of implications to some of the current puzzles and designs related to water already, so there aren't many places to dive in the current Hyrule regardless anyway, so it's not that big a deal, honestly. Climbing didn't really change too much, at least as far as I can tell, and that's all good. It's a pretty good system, and it somehow creates countless risk versus reward scenarios for something as simple as a green bar versus a rock face. Somehow, making it to the very top of that hill or mountain is, it's so gratifying when you finally do manage to do it. It's especially hard to put your finger on it, because from an outside perspective it might just look boring or tedious. But it's good, trust me. Oh, another thing, you can't do the whistle sprint anymore. I suppose Link is too busy breathing while running now. The Great Fairy Fountain locations are now marked on the map at some point, and they used to not be there, and it was kind of annoying to know where they are unless you've actually marked them previously, which sometimes you just kind of forget to do, so it's nice that they do it for you. Especially when it's sort of a place that you like going to upgrade your armor. There's also like coordinates on the minimap. This is more like a quality of life change. It helps you share locations with your friends at least. That's pretty nice when you think about it like that. It's shrine time. It's puzzle time. I like shrines, they're pretty good. They're overall pretty good and fun and good and different. They're good. I like them. The rewards are very good, especially when you get an additional heart or more stamina. It's irreplaceable in terms of progression. You can often end up solving a shrine in your own way. Like, you can tell that you probably didn't pull it off as intended. You could also just say that the intended way is your way. The creative solutions are part of what makes the puzzles more fun, engaging, and gratifying to complete. Structurally, the main temples and main story progression remain the same as in Breath of the Wild, though Tears of the Kingdom's main temples can sometimes end up being a bit confusing to solve. They basically revolve around having a door of sorts locked off by a varying number of keys, so pretty much structured the same all aboard. Sometimes you end up in a situation where you just don't know what you're supposed to do to get to where you want to be. You just don't know how you're even supposed to get there. And if you're like me and have a reluctance to look things up, it can make finding things out quite confusing and leave you stuck for ages. I was personally stuck on every single main temple, at least at some point. I'm very much not against players having to find things out on their own, and you could say that finding out where to go and what to do is part of the puzzle, but grasping straws leads nowhere. And that's why I think it would be nice to have a hint in some way. Perhaps maybe, let's say, if you go back and try to open the door with the locks with some still remaining, it would give you a hint for one of the remaining keys regarding how to unlock it for those who are stuck. I think this would be a good thing, all to try and strike a better balance between hand-holding and being left out to dry. Also, I've got to admit, the premise of the Divine Beasts as main temples back in Breath of the Wild beats most of the main temples from Tears of the Kingdom, which are mostly just some ancient building. I would say the one that comes closest to the glory of the Divine Beasts is the Flying Boat Temple, though. That's pretty cool. I mean, the flying boat, you know? It's time for wombat combat and difficulty and the progressions. The game is definitely not easy, though sometimes you reach a point where once you know what mechanics to choose during combat, it becomes way easier. The difficulty also just sort of scales with your progression. As bosses become easier the stronger you are. Some do scale up, but generally speaking they become much more manageable. And then there's the options for how to deal with a difficult enemy, because there's so many. It sort of makes combat a different, like, sort of creative puzzle entirely. Approaching the enemy and deciding whether to run or to fight is also pretty entertaining when you get to have that choice. But if things are still too hard, you can cook. Cooking can mitigate a lot of difficulty within the game, so there's also that. I also don't know about you, but I get one shot a lot. Pretty hilarious to me most of the time when I get owned super hard, but I can see it being a huge annoyance, especially when your entire gameplay flow is suddenly abruptly ended just like that, and sometimes a little bit too often. The rollbacks to your previous save can also often be salt in the wound and are generally pretty annoying, especially when you have to do some of the more mundane and tedious things a second time. There's also the new gloom mechanic, I mentioned it earlier. It's an interesting mechanic, mostly hampering you in the underground. It makes damage a tad bit more permanent in a way, since you need to find different food items to clear it. Either that or visit a light bulb, or go overground again. And even so, clearing it will still leave your heart container empty, waiting for regular food to fill it out. It's one more thing to worry about and work around, and I'm all for it. Progression is very smooth, and becoming more and more powerful and skilled at the game is a very satisfying process, especially when I had forgotten the controls entirely. While enemies do become gradually stronger, base weapons and fused materials do as well, which means your weapons are gonna get stronger and stronger as well. Nothing beats returning to an enemy that completely devastated you at the beginning of the game, especially after becoming much stronger. Gradually, you get to have a fighting chance against the most powerful opponents. Soon enough, you obliterate them without a second thought. It's a very satisfying overall process, especially when you get to mess up some of the big guys who trolled you hard early game. Also, the inclusion of adaptive music isn't entirely new in the sequel, but it's still great, especially when a fight ramps up. It helps set the stage for something grand. Nothing beats the satisfaction of the fight theme concluding epically as you make your final strike upon the huge monster you're fighting. Oh, and bullet time now only uses up stamina when you fire an arrow. This is pretty useful when you have to select items to use with arrows. It also gives you more time to actually aim your shots. There's no differences in terms of weapon types from Breath of the Wild. It's still one-handed sword, two-handed sword, spear, bow, and shield. In Breath of the Wild, weapons were a deal breaker for many as they kept breaking. And durability still isn't entirely visible. You'll only briefly be prompted when your weapon is about to break, and sometimes that notification will be too late. The only other way you'll know is that when you see the animated red overlay in the menus. The inclusion of fuse does change the ball game a bit, and it brings a lot of excitement and discovery when you get to fuse all kinds of strange things onto your weapons and shields. What's very nice is that you can bring your weapons to Terrytown and have them unfused when they're about to break, so you can keep reusing the same precious material that you tried so hard to get. It doesn't completely mitigate the weapons issue though, and also managing the weapons inventory can be pretty annoying, especially given that there's few slots to work with. This is especially the case if you get too many good ones and don't know which ones to choose.
So many guns, I don't know which one to use. You want one?
You can use Korok seeds though to make your weapons inventory larger. What's more, when fusing, you can also attach sonai devices onto your weapon and they will mostly work. They interact differently with weapons and shields, which is pretty nice. What I really like to do is putting a cart on my shield and make it into a skateboard. It's so cool, but it breaks so fast. Also really like elemental weapons. They can be made from gemstones, Gleeok, and dragon horns, and they can do all sorts of crazy stuff based on what elemental power they possess. Also, getting the option to pick a weapon to drop when opening a chest is nice, especially when you're carrying a lot of disposable ones anyways. And that brings us on to building. I love building. Sonai devices are fun when they work, and building mechanics aren't too complex, which is a good thing. Gives you a lot of room for creativity, and it can be a lot of fun too. The community has already created some pretty insane and wild stuff, and it's always fun to check it out. Though for me, oftentimes, the sonai devices can end up feeling a little bit underwhelming, mostly when a lot of them can vaporize into thin air after being used for a while. It's either that or they run out of battery relatively quickly, especially early game. with the only mitigation being mining for sonite and upgrading your capacity, or having battery components attached to your device, or wanting to spend a whole lot of charges. Even so, infinite battery won't prevent a lot of them from eventually becoming party poopers and vaporizing, which can very abruptly stop you from doing whatever you were doing. And the worst offender is the glide bird thing. It just vaporizes and leaves you to plummet. Might be a little funny the first couple of times, but it just gets progressively more annoying. Why do they have to disappear so fast? Also, the cooking pot can only be used a singular time. It feels a bit excessive for a mechanic you don't really use that often anyways. So you just kind of don't use the cooking mod. Alright, other things. The frame rate and performance of the game is surprisingly good, especially for a Switch game. Maybe that's because the most recent game I've played is Pokemon Scarlet. You don't really need much more than what the game offers anyways, and it's not some sort of competitive shooter or any similar genre that requires it anyhow, so it's fine. The only places it drops is whenever there are too many entities, such as like animals or enemies around, which is pretty uncommon, I'd say, while playing the game. It doesn't lag in Korok Forest anymore. What else? The loading screen is better. The map being visible is much cooler than the Breath of the Wild emptiness. Also, sorting options are cool and nice, especially by most use. That's my favorite one. Oh yeah, last but not least, Pura is hot now. Like, you gotta buy the game now. You got no choice. Okay, so overall, does it live up to the hype? It's very good. A lot of care has been put into it, clearly, and I expect nothing less from the sequel to one of my favorite games. A lot of the time you have so much freedom and creativity that you almost just don't know what to do with it, and I'm all for it. It's also very, comforting to play a lot of the time. It helps alleviate a bit of stress from you, which is really nice. That doesn't mean that the combat can't be exhilarating, because oh boy. The game is different enough to merit being called a sequel and not just a copy, because some things are just fundamentally different, but yet it doesn't stray too far from the things you love from Breath of the Wild, so that's awesome. A downside that almost just kinda goes without saying is what comes with being a sequel. Like, context matters, and without any knowledge of Breath of the Wild, a little bit of the structure of the game just falls a little bit apart. Not just for the story, but I can imagine for the general engagement in the world as well. I'm pretty sure you can still enjoy the game, but for the full experience you'd probably need to play Breath of the Wild first. For the lore side, I've also heard that Age of Calamity adds a lot of lore to the story 100 years prior to when Breath of the Wild has taken place, which can in turn add additional context to Tears of the Kingdom. But I'm a fool and I haven't played Age of Calamity, so who am I to say? I'm not the type of person to give definitive scores, and I could probably end up saying 5 out of 5 stars, or 10 out of 10 cheese hamburgers, despite its fair share of problems and nitpickings, which I just love talking about all day long. I mean, I would put this game in the triple S tier on a tier list any day. It's hard to tell for me whether this one or Breath of the Wild is better, especially because the experiences have felt different enough to confuse me. But is the difference is the difference a good or a bad thing? I mean, it's hard to tell, but honestly I think it's pretty good. So yes, it does live up to the hype, guys. Just buy it already. Play it. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'd be happy to make more videos like this one in the future, especially if the reception is good, so if you got the time, feel free to leave a comment down below. See you in the next one. Smash like. Smash like. It has to be said. Also subscribe.